So let's now take a look at a group force session IDs, and this is actually a very simple attack, and I want to show you just what this means now. Let's imagine there is an attack that has gone to a website and they get a session ID like this one that we see the URL in the previous lectures. Just here doesn't matter whether it's said via the URL or via the cookie. It's just a little bit easier to demonstrate with the URL, but you will see the relevance both in a moment. Now what brute forcing means is that we are just going to keep trying different possible session IDs until we stumble across one that is actually attached to a authenticated user. So for example, if we use a session ID that does look rather like it compiles to a pattern, or a pattern that we could step through just by incrementing the values. So for example, we have a session ID and we want to access it. So if we can change the last digit. Well, the first thing is that the responses came back and it actually increment the URL. So instead of that, they're going to, if that doesn't match, then it won't be valid session and the increment value will be changing. So if we get anything for that increment our session ID. So if we try again and finally it matches, then we can log into that user, and in this case as the attacker has simply been able to guess a valid session ID from a victim with a authenticated victim, and clearly we now have a session ID that is valid. Now this was possible because over in the background there is a session and there is a authenticated same session ID that logged in as me as an example. So the other session that has been our hijack session, simply by brute forcing or really just guessing a very educated guess, because it's just a simple numeration, but it is still guessing for a valid session ID. So this is just a very simple and immortal. So let's go and look at the slide to demonstrate this very clearly. So here's what happened. Very simple case of having a victim to go and an app that are talking backward and forward with a particular session ID, and then an attacker comes along and the attacker is effectively just asking the server, so does the session ID ending with 762 exist, and the response comes back, and what implies that no it doesn't. Then the responses that we saw in the browser, then the server actually gives us the different session ID because the first one wasn't actually valid. So after the attack of any enumerates, it goes to like session ID 763 and asks the server, and then 764, and it just keeps going until it gets a valid response. Now of course this is something that can be highly automated. You script this out and you run it on a bulk and attack, so it doesn't sit there in the browser and it just manually incrementing the URL. Now of course because of this is such a broad cross style approach, just simply enumerating and guessing, it also works like sort of things that can be remotely detected. This would be very unusual behavior to continually see and request for a invalid session IDs which comes in from an attacker, but detecting it is not something that applications normally do. So what we can do to prevent the session hijacking? So HTTP indicates that the security of a website. So if you access those website URL starting with the HTTPS instead of HTTP, this means that the data your computer sends to the server will be encrypted. Without the HTTP, data packets sent between your computer and the server, which are essentially a plain text, meaning the malicious hacker can just read them as they are. So logging out your account will terminate this session. This means you will be able to force the attacker to log out and stopping him to hijacking the session. And go to the HTTP header and find the set cookie and set the HTTP only attribute, and this way the threat actors will not have a possibility to access the cookies from a client side scripts, so that you can also apply the secure and same side directives. An unencrypted Wi-Fi network is an open invitation for a malicious hacker to steal your information easily. Using either a hardware tool or a software, a malicious hacker can easily intercept the traffic and see what is communicated over the open network. So this includes everything from credit card data to password to instant messages or emails that are important to you. As a takeaway, do your best not to use the open Wi-Fi networks. If you have to use the network, switch to your data plan instead, or if you still need public Wi-Fi, make sure you use a VPN that protects and encrypts your data. And finally, another way to make sure the session stealing malware doesn't infect you is to use the traffic filtering solution. These programs scans your traffic and then block any malware that might be coming toward your PC. A traffic filtering solution will also scan your outgoing traffic. So if it notices personal information of your going to use any suspicious website, then it will cut off the communication and keeping it safe and out of the hands of malicious hacker. And there is a big risk at stakes that need to be fixed, and we are going to cover the solution of this later on. So for now though, this is the fundamentals of brute forcing a session ID, which is I think is pretty basic stuff.